Story Chapter 13, Part 2. Ernie gave me a solemn nod of acknowledgement as he turned and called further down to Todd, who evidently had progressed quite a ways in extending the runway while I'd been at work. Todd came up. Todd came up, and he and Ernie stood watching on the launch pad as I finalized my preparations. Removing my gloves, I put them in the hole I'd carved out, and sitting down, settled my heels into their holes. I smashed the hatchet into the frozen surface on the left side, checked its hold, unzipped my jacket about halfway, and checked my knife was readily accessible. Checked the T-bar hold in my right hand and wriggled my backside and heels into their respective holes. "Everything good, Scott?" Todd called across. "Landing pad secure, Captain," I called back, flourishing a theatrical salute. "You can shoot the old carp across whenever you're ready." I could see Todd was laughing as he secured the rope about Ernie's waist, who gamely managed a feeble smile in response. You got that first line secured?" Todd called across as he sat down on the ice with his back to the embedded T-bar. Again, I theatrically saluted as I displayed the rope was affixed to my T-bar as well as around my waist. I sat watching Ernie, who with no doubt great trepidation crawled cautiously out onto the ice alongside Todd's bent legs. Todd bent forward and grasped Ernie's ankles. "Incoming carp," he yelled, grinning over at me. "On 3, Ernie." 1. Ernie looked over at me with wide, pleading eyes. I held my arms open in a receptive gesture I hoped would provide him with some degree of comfort. 2. Ernie's eyes scrunched tight. 3. Todd grunted as he sent Ernie off on his way. Eyes still scrunched shut, Ernie came up a bit short, and I barely managed to get a hold of him by the collar of his coat. "Am I safe?" Ernie asked, eyes still shut tight. "You'd help me a little," I grunted, with his eyes still shut tight. Ernie blindly crawled up onto my lap, and I rolled him over beside me. "Am I safe?" Ernie asked again, panting, lying sprawled beside me, eyes still scrunched shut. "Safe as if in your mama's arms," I laughed. "I don't know how safe that was," Ernie replied, blinking up at me. "Ma always claimed that all the brothers. She was sure it was me she dropped head first onto the wood stove. I always put it down as one of them like in-house family jokes," he continued, sitting up and looking somewhat bewilderedly about. "Now maybe I ain't so sure. I must have taken a good knock upside my head at some point in time or another to have even given consideration to something like this." He summated, gesturing down across the wind-swept ice he'd just traveled across in such an unorthodox fashion. Excuse me. "Here, take this," I said, laughing as I extracted the hatchet. "Carve yourself some holes like I did." I displayed the hole I was sitting in where I dug for my heels. "What a day," Ernie laughed in replying as he began hacking away. "First I meet God and the devil himself, and now I'm a carp and I'm carving me own arseholes." "Ouch," I groaned. "I know," Ernie said, still hacking and chopping industriously away. "A bit lowbrow, but under the circumstances you should give me credit still for having a command of the English language at all, don't you think?" "Sorry, Ernie," I laughed in response. "I hadn't brought you out here thinking we'd end up in a predicament like this." "Oh, hell, ain't your fault, Scott," Ernie replied. "It's that devil. He's a persistent bugger, he is." After handing me the hatchet and wriggling his heel and backsides into the holes he'd carved, Ernie turned towards me. You figure he can make it across there? I dread the thought of that. Us two skinny fellas having to reel him in. He's a big boy." "A valid concern, Ernie," I answered. As mutually settled in, we watched Todd begin his preparations. "Even odds, I figure." "You think?" Ernie said, sounding dubious. "Don't underestimate him, Ernie. As much as we all rib him about still carrying all that baby fat, Todd's always been real athletic." "That right?" Ernie asked in response, still sounding dubious. "Yeah, I went all through grade school with Todd, and he was always the toughest kid in the class." "No kidding. Who was the toughest?" Ernie asked. Some wild little blonde kid named Robbie, but I think his old man beat him and his older brother near half to death on his regular basis, and he was probably genuinely psychotic. Psychotic? Yeah, crazy. Crazy like a shithouse rat. Huh. Ernie pondered for a while as we continued to watch Todd down and across the way in his preparations. Where'd you come in the standings then? Ernie asked me. Third is a year. Third is a rule. Most years, I answered. Had displaced to fourth now and again. You know how it is. People move, kids come, kids go. I could never whoop Todd, though. Even in the early grades when we were still the same size, Todd always managed to get the better of me. After pondering this, Ernie inquired, "Did you ever get the better of him? Like, say, in grade 2 or so before he started outgrowing you?" "No," I replied after some consideration. "Todd always put me down pretty quick." "That bodes well then, Scotty." "How so?" I asked. "Well, I've seen you in action, you scrawny wee bugger. You're like a rooster. The older boys come around here figuring they're going to bully their way in, and you just go right at them. Smart ones turn their tail, and you send the rest away bloody." "Well, thanks, I guess," I mumbled. "Don't worry, Ernie. Don't worry, Scotty," Ernie laughed, giving me a thump across the back. "You'll probably fill out some. You probably won't stay scrawny like me." "Well, you're a great comfort, Ernie," I said with mock sourness. "Ha," Ernie laughed, giving me another thump across the shoulder. "My point is, from what I've seen and from what you're telling me, there's hope the big bugger can make it across on his own." I'd been watching Todd in his preparations in the meanwhile. After pacing things out 2 or 3 times, he'd gone back down to elongate the runway up to the launch pad, and then had paced it off a couple of more times. He now stood looking intently across the way up at me as he wiggled the run remaining T-bar loose from where he'd earlier pounded into the ice. I nodded back, displaying the ropes, and related were in order. "You figure he's about ready to make his attempt?" Ernie asked. "Yeah," I replied. "Why didn't he shoot that T-bar over then?" "Don't know," I replied, studying Todd as he carefully backed down the runway, paying out rope as he went. "Don't care. I can find that easy enough when this shitfest melts." Todd was now back at the end of the runway. Ernie and I watched as he pulled his hatchet out and grasped it firmly in his right hand. He checked the rope tied at his waist, checked his footing. He stared across at me as his cheeks puffed and his chest heaved. "By Christ, I hope he makes it," Ernie stated quietly, squirming about in his holes. "He'll make it and then some," I said, watching as Todd crouched down into a sprinter squat and our eyes met. "Geez, I hope you're right," Ernie near whispered, still squirming about. I expected Todd to explode into motion, but he wisely paced his start, slowly picking up speed on his approach to the launch pad. Explode he did when he hit the launch pad. Ernie and I both gasped in awe as Todd bent low with one last powerful stride at the end of the launch pad, grabbed the T-bar in his left hand, and sailed out over the ice. It was obvious I was right in predicting Todd would make it, and then some, but it was evident Todd had forgotten to account for the slope running crossways down towards the ravine. Ernie, who was left with little choice but to abandon his entrenchment for fear of being impaled with the T-bar in Todd's left hand, rolled onto my lap with a squawk of alarm. Todd shot up the knoll well past us, barrel rolled 3 times, and bouncing to his feet, shouted, "Hot damn, that was some kind of fun." Tossing Ernie aside, I bounded to my feet and danced wildly about. Todd and I danced wildly about, hooting and hollering. Ernie, rising to his feet as Todd and I wound down from our wild jubilation, said, laughing, "Stand still, you young damn fools. You got your rigmaroles all tangled up." Todd and I shared a mutually sheepish look as Ernie said about getting us untangled. "That was a damn fine display of athleticism, Todd. Damn fine it was," Ernie declared, still toiling away at our entanglement. "But I gotta say, lads got what seems to be a right peculiar notion of what you consider to be consistent of fun." Ernie by now had managed to get the ropes off from around our waists and was separating and coiling them up. "I couldn't believe you took the risk of snatching up that T-bar," I said to Todd. "When you didn't shoot it across, I thought you were just going to leave it behind." Todd gazed off into the distance with that faraway look of deep contemplation. Hadn't occurred to me to let go of it, he said, grinning. Ernie now stood before us, holding out the neatly coiled ropes. Why, out of all of our rigmarole, that's my primary weapon. I ain't letting go of it till I'm safely back in Diane's kitchen. Todd summated as he slung the rope where he offered it over his shoulder. After some more humorous banter and mutual congratulations and such, Ernie said, "All right, Scotty, get us up to that barnyard before the devil cooks something else up." "Wait a minute, Ernie," Todd interjected, gesturing down towards the ravine. "Do you not think if I was to drag down some hay bales and—" "No, Todd," Ernie gave him up. "You got to get that notion up. There's no way we can get the tractor out of there with what's at hand. There's nothing for it but call Eddie Calvert." Eddie owned and operated heavy equipment. "Besides," Ernie continued, "I couldn't go imagine how I could explain to my insurance how it was that both the car and the truck turned turtle on top of a tractor in a ravine in the middle of a field, no less." "Well," Todd replied, "maybe we can get up to the house. You can check your insurance policy." "Check my what? Insurance policy? What for?" Ernie sputtered. "See if there's a gravity clause," Todd replied. Ernie's eyes went wide and his jaw jutted forward. Turning towards me, he jerked his thumb over his shoulder towards Todd. "Why, Scotty, I do believe I'm giving serious consideration as to throttling your young pal here." "Believe me, Ernie," I responded, "it wouldn't be the first time today that notion's been given serious consideration." Ernie turned back towards Todd, who stood rocking on his heels with a grin plastered on his mud. "My God, he taxed the patience of a saint," Ernie declared. "Get me back up to the house, Scotty. You must be needing a stiff jolt of whiskey near as bad as I am." Todd just laughed. End of chapter 13.